I stood at the edge of the reception hall, champagne flute in hand, watching my sister Lily twirl in her wedding dress. She was radiant, of course. Lily was always radiant. The soft lighting caught the delicate beading on her custom gown, transforming her into something otherworldly as she danced with her new husband. Everyone watched her with adoration, especially our parents, who hadn't taken their eyes off her all day. "She looks beautiful," my husband Mark whispered, sliding his arm around my waist. "The whole wedding is amazing." I nodded, trying to shake off the shadow of resentment that had been following me all day. "It is. Mom and Dad really outdid themselves." That was the understatement of the year. My parents had spared no expense for Lily's perfect day. The venue was the most exclusive in the city, the flowers flown in from Holland, the champagne vintage. A far cry from my own wedding 5 years earlier, where I'd been told to keep things reasonable and had received a check for exactly $5,000 toward expenses. "You know how things are right now," my mother had said then. "Your father's business is going through a rough patch. We wish we could do more." I understood. I always understood. That's why when their rough patch continued and they called me, in tears about potentially losing their home, I stepped in. For the past 5 years, I'd been quietly transferring money into their account to cover the mortgage payments. Mark and I weren't wealthy by any means. I was a high school guidance counselor and he worked in IT. But we lived carefully, saved aggressively, and made it work. The mortgage payments strained our budget to the breaking point some months. But the thought of my parents losing the home where I grew up was unbearable. "Tessa, Mark, come join us." My mother waved from across the room, where she stood with my father and a cluster of relatives. I plastered on a smile and made my way. Over, Mark's hand a reassuring presence on my lower back. "Isn't this wonderful?" Mom gushed, pulling me into a perfumed hug. "Lily found the perfect man, and now she'll have the perfect start to her marriage." "It's beautiful," I agreed. "You two have been so generous with everything." My father beamed, his cheeks flushed with pride and expensive bourbon. "Nothing but the best for our Lily, and wait until you hear our surprise announcement." A chill ran down my spine. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "What announcement?" "You'll find out with everyone else," Mom said with a conspiratorial wink. "It's going to be such a special moment." Before I could press further, they were pulled away by the wedding planner, leaving me with a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. Mark noticed my expression and squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I just have a weird feeling about this surprise." Mark's reply was cut off by the clinking of silverware against glass. The father of the groom was calling for everyone's attention, signaling the beginning of the speeches. We found our seats at the family table as toasts began, one after another, each speaker outdoing the last with flowery praise for the newlyweds. Finally, my father stood, microphone in hand, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "When my little Lily was born," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I promised her the world, and watching her grow into the amazing woman she is today has been the greatest joy of my life." I felt a familiar pang. He'd never spoken about me that way, not even at my own wedding. Beside me, Mark subtly placed his hand on my knee, a silent acknowledgement. "Barbara and I wanted to give Lily and Jason a wedding gift that truly showed how much we love them and how proud we are," Dad continued. "So today, we're giving them something very special." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Lily, Jason, your mother and I are giving you our home." The room erupted in gasps and applause. I sat frozen, certain I'd misheard. "The house is completely paid off, and it's yours. To start your new life together," Dad announced proudly. "We've already signed all the paperwork. The keys are in this envelope." My breath caught in my throat. Paid off? That wasn't possible unless... I turned to look at my mother, who was wiping away tears of joy, avoiding my gaze. The room spun around. Me as Lily rushed to embrace our parents, sobbing with gratitude. Jason shook my father's hand vigorously while camera flashes captured the moment from every angle. "Did you know about this?" I whispered to Mark, my voice barely audible. He shook his head, his expression grim. "No, this is the first I'm hearing of it." The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I moved through it mechanically, dancing when expected, smiling for photos, making small talk with relatives who gushed about how generous my parents were. Inside, I was screaming. 5 years of financial sacrifice, of postponing our own dreams, of stretching every paycheck to its limit, all so my parents could gift their home to my sister who had never contributed a dime. As the evening wound down, I found myself cornered by my mother near the ladies' room. "Wasn't that wonderful?" she gushed, readjusting her corsage. "Lily couldn't believe it. She was so surprised." "Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice level, "I've been paying your mortgage for 5 years. Did you forget that?" Her smile faltered, slightly, but didn't disappear. "Oh, Tessa, don't be dramatic. You helped us through a tough time, and we're so grateful. But that was just temporary assistance." "Temporary? It was just last month that Dad called asking for the money, saying you still couldn't make the payments." She waved her hand dismissively. "Well, things have turned around. Your father's business picked up, and we were able to make the final payments ourselves." "When?" I pressed. "When exactly did you make these payments?" "I don't remember the exact dates," she said, suddenly interested in fixing her makeup in the mirror. "Anyway, this isn't really the time or place for this discussion. It's Lily's special day." "It's always Lily's special day," I muttered. Mom turned to me, her expression hardening. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, forget it." I pushed past her, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but there. I found Mark waiting for me near the exit, concern etched across his face. "I think we need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Are you sure? Your parents might—" "I don't care what my parents might think right now," I cut him off. "If we stay, I'm going to say something I'll regret." We slipped out without saying goodbye. The drive home silent, except for the occasional sound of me struggling to hold back tears. When we finally reached our modest apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, the full weight of the betrayal crashing down on me. "How could they?" I sobbed as Mark sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "All those years, all that money. I could have been saving for our future, for the family we want to start. Instead, I was paying for a gift for Lily." "We should talk to them," Mark suggested gently. "There has to be some explanation." But I knew better. This was just the latest in a lifetime of moments where Lily came first, where her needs and happiness eclipsed mine. The golden child and the afterthought. Our roles had been assigned long ago and never changed. "I don't want to talk to them," I said, wiping my eyes. "Not tomorrow, not next week. I need time." Mark nodded, understanding as always. "Whatever you need, we'll figure this out together." That night, I tossed and turned, replaying the events of the day, calculating exactly how much money I'd given my parents over the years, nearly $120,000 that we'd never see again. Money that could have been a down payment on a better home for us or invested for our future children's education. Instead, it had become Lily's wedding present. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront my parents, not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what had happened, and I needed to figure out how to move forward without the weight of resentment crushing me. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of the storm. The true betrayal was yet to come. A week passed before my parents called. I let it go to voicemail each time, not ready to hear their voices without breaking down in anger or tears. Lily and Jason had left for their 3-week honeymoon in the Maldives, another gift from my parents, so at least I didn't have to worry about running into them. It was Mark who eventually convinced me to return my mother's calls. "You'll feel worse if you keep avoiding them," he reasoned. "Clear the air, say what you need to say, and then decide where to go from there. He was right, as usual. So on a rainy Sunday afternoon, I finally called my mother back, heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. Tessa, finally. She sounded relieved. We've been so worried. You disappeared from the wedding without saying goodbye, and then you wouldn't answer our calls. I needed some space, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. It was a lot to process. What was? The casual ignorance in her tone made my blood boil. You gave Lily the house I've been paying the mortgage on for 5 years, Mom. Without warning me, without discussing it, without offering to pay me back. There was a pause on the other end. Oh, Tessa, is that what this is about? You're jealous of your sister's wedding gift? Jealous? I sputtered. This isn't about jealousy. It's about the fact that I've been financially supporting you and Dad, sacrificing my own financial security to help you keep that house, and then you turned around and gave it to Lily. The money you sent was a gift, Mom said firmly. You offered to help us when we were struggling. There was never any agreement about paying you back. I gripped the phone tighter. I offered to help you keep your home, not to fund a gift for Lily. There's a difference. Well, it's done now, she said with finality. The house is in Lily and Jason's names. And frankly, Tessa, I'm disappointed that you'd try to put a damper on your sister's happiness this way. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 silently. That's not what I'm doing, Mom. Anyway, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken, your father and I wanted to talk to you about something important. That's why we've been calling. Could you and Mark come to dinner this Friday? We have some news to share. The abrupt change of subject left me reeling. News? What news? It's better to discuss in person. Friday at 7? I'll make your favorite lasagna. I wanted to refuse, to demand we finish discussing the house, but experience had taught me it would be futile. My parents were masters at avoiding uncomfortable conversations, especially when they involved acknowledging any wrongdoing on their part. Fine, I said finally. We'll be there. After hanging up, I filled Mark in on the conversation. They've got news now, I said, making air quotes. And they've completely dismissed the house situation as if I'm being petty. Mark frowned. What kind of news do you think it is? With them? Who knows? Maybe they're giving Lily our firstborn child as a housewarming gift, I said bitterly. He didn't laugh. Instead, he pulled me into a hug. We'll face it together, whatever it is. And Tessa, I'm proud of you for agreeing to dinner. It would be easier to keep avoiding them. I wasn't sure if I deserved his praise. Part of me had agreed to dinner out of morbid curiosity, while another part still desperately wanted my parents' approval, even after everything. Old habits die, hard, especially when they're formed in childhood. The week dragged by slowly. At work, I found it hard to focus on my students' problems when my own were consuming my thoughts. More than once, I caught myself staring blankly at my office wall instead of listening to a senior worried about college applications. Some guidance counselor I was. Friday evening arrived with a sense of foreboding. Mark drove us to my parents' house, Lily and Jason's house now, in silence. I noticed my father had already replaced the mailbox with one bearing Mr. and Mrs. Jason Wheeler in fancy script. Ready? Mark asked as we sat in the driveway, the engine idling. No, I admitted. But let's get this over with. Mom answered the sigh, door with her usual enthusiasm, acting as if our phone conversation had never happened. Dad hugged me stiffly, then clapped Mark on the back with more warmth than he'd shown me. They led us through the familiar rooms of my childhood home, now in transition with some of my parents' belongings packed in boxes. Lily and Jason decided to keep most of the furniture, Mom explained as we passed through the living room. But we're taking our personal items, of course. Where are you moving to? Mark asked, asking the question I should have thought to ask days ago. My parents exchanged a look that set off warning bells in my head. That's actually what we wanted to discuss over dinner, Dad said, gesturing toward the dining room where the table was already set. We went through the motions of serving food and making small talk about the weather and local news. Finally, as Mom brought out coffee and dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "So, about our living situation," he began, looking more at Mark than at me. "As you know, we've given the house to Lily and Jason, which means we need somewhere to live when they return from their honeymoon." I nodded slowly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "We've been thinking about it a lot," Mom continued, "and we've decided the most sensible solution is for us to move into your vacation property in Lake Tahoe." The bite of tiramisu I'd just taken stuck in my throat. 2 years ago, Mark and I had scraped together every penny we had to buy a small cabin near Lake Tahoe. It wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a porch with a view of the pines. But it was our sanctuary, our escape from the pressures of work and, yes, sometimes family. "You want to move into our cabin?" I finally managed to say. "Just until we figure out our next steps," Dad said quickly. "We're thinking of retiring in the next few years, and we've always loved the mountains. This would give us a chance to try it out before we commit to buying something there." "But that's our vacation home," I said, still processing. "We use it regularly." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "You can still use it when we're not there. Or you could stay with us when you visit. It would be like a family retreat." I looked at Mark, whose expression remained carefully neutral, though I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching, a sure sign he was holding back his true feelings. "How long are you thinking of staying there?" he asked my parents. "Oh, we haven't really put a timeline on it," Dad said vaguely. "Maybe a year or 2? Until we're ready for the next chapter?" "A year or 2? I repeated incredulously. "You want to live in our vacation home for potentially years, rent-free, after giving away the house I helped pay for?" My mother's smile tightened. "Tessa, I thought we'd moved past that. The money you gave us was a gift, not an investment. And this would be temporary," Dad added. "Just until we get back on our feet." "Back on your feet?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "You just told me Dad's business picked up and things turned around. That's how you were able to pay off the mortgage, remember?" They exchanged another look. "Well, business is good," Dad hedged, "but retirement planning is complicated. We're not as financially prepared as we should be." "Because you gave away your biggest asset to Lily," I pointed out. "We gave our daughter a wedding present," Mom corrected sharply. "Just as we would have done for you if circumstances had been different." "But they weren't different for me, were they?" I said, the hurt of years bubbling to the surface. "When I got married, you gave me $5,000 and told me to keep things reasonable. And now you expect me to hand over my vacation home so you can figure out your retirement after giving Lily a house worth at least $500,000? Now you're just being selfish," Mom snapped. "After everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me lately?" I interrupted, surprising myself with my boldness. "I've been the one supporting you for years, not the other way around." "We raised you," Dad said sternly. "We put you through college. We've always been there for you." "And I've been there for you too," I countered. "But that doesn't mean you can take advantage of me forever." "Take advantage?" Mom's voice rose. "Is that what you think we're doing? Asking our daughter for help in our time of need?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "When was the last time you asked Lily for help? When was the last time she had to sacrifice anything for this family?" "Your sister has her own challenges," Mom said defensively. "Like what? Getting free houses? Going on luxury honeymoons? Please enlighten me about Lily's terrible struggles." "This isn't about comparing you and your sister," Dad interjected. "This is about family supporting each other." "No," I said firmly. "This is about you expecting me to keep giving while you keep taking. And I'm done." I stood up from the table, my dinner barely touched. "The answer is no. You cannot move into our cabin, not for a year, not for 6 months, not even for a weekend without our explicit invitation each time." "Tessa," Mom gasped, "you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied, surprised by the steady calm in my voice. "Mark and I have supported you for years without complaint. We've put our own plans on hold to help you keep your home. And your thanks was to give that home to Lily without so much as a conversation with me first. So no, you don't get to live in our vacation property now. Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You ungrateful— Don't, Mark cut in, standing up beside me. Don't say something you'll regret, sir. My father closed his mouth, but the fury in his eyes spoke volumes. We should go, I said to Mark, who nodded in agreement. Think about this, Tessa, Mom pleaded as we moved toward the door. We're your parents. Family has to stick together. I have thought about it, I replied. For years I've thought about how our family works, and I'm finally seeing it clearly. Goodbye, Mom. Dad. We'll talk when you're ready to treat Mark and me with the same consideration you show Lily. We walked out to stunned silence behind us. It wasn't until we were in the car, pulling away from the house I grew up in, the house that now belonged to my sister, that I began to shake. You okay? Mark asked, reaching over to take my hand. No, I admitted. But I think I will be. What I didn't know then was that my parents weren't going to accept my decision without a fight. And that fight would soon escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Texts from relatives, voicemails from family friends, even a few messages from former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years. At first, I was confused. Had something happened to my parents? To Lily? But as I began reading the messages, a different picture emerged. Your mom told me what happened. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. That was from my Aunt Susan. Just saw your mom's Facebook post. Is everything okay? From a cousin I barely spoke to. Can't believe you'd throw your parents out on the street. Call me. My godmother, always dramatic. What's going on? Mark asked, watching my face as I scrolled through the barrage. I don't know yet, but apparently my mother has been busy, I muttered, opening Facebook to investigate. There it was, at the top of my feed, a lengthy post from my mother that had already garnered dozens of sympathetic comments and shares. My stomach dropped as I read it aloud to Mark. With heavy hearts, Robert and I must share some difficult family news, I read. After giving our beloved family home to Lily and Jason as a wedding gift, we approached our daughter Tessa about temporarily staying in her vacation property while we transitioned to retirement. We were met with a cold refusal and hurtful accusations. At our age, this kind of family rejection is devastating. We've always tried to be fair and loving parents to both our daughters, but sometimes even parents' love isn't enough to ensure they'll be cared for in their golden years. The post continued in the same vein, painting them as generous parents cruelly abandoned by their eldest daughter in their time of need. She'd even included a photo of them standing forlornly with their packed suitcases, as if they were about to be homeless. This is unbelievable, Mark said, reading over my shoulder. They're completely twisting what happened. I nodded, too stunned to speak. My mother had always been skilled at controlling the narrative, but this was a new low. She'd effectively turned our entire social circle against me with a single calculated post. The comments were worse. Friends and family offering my parents places to stay, others expressing shock at my selfishness, and several suggesting they had always seen this side of Tessa, but had kept quiet until now. My cousin Jen had even tagged Lily, writing, "Have you seen what your sister is doing to your parents? Someone needs to talk some sense into her." Thankfully, Lily was still on her honeymoon and likely offline. The last thing I needed was her wading into this mess before I had a chance to set the record straight. What do I do? I asked Mark, feeling overwhelmed. If I respond publicly, it just becomes a bigger spectacle. If I don't, everyone believes their version. We need to talk to your parents directly first, Mark said firmly. This passive-aggressive public shaming isn't how adults should handle disagreements. I nodded, though the thought of facing them again so soon made my stomach churn. I'll call them, my father answered on the first ring, his voice clipped. Tessa, have you reconsidered your position? Dad, what is Mom doing? That Facebook post is full of half-truths and manipulations. You know that's not what happened. What happened is that you refused to help your parents after we've supported you your entire life, he said coldly. Your mother is understandably hurt. Supported me? Dad, I've been supporting you financially for years, and now you're trying to publicly shame me because I won't give you my vacation home too? No one's trying to shame you, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. We're just sharing our situation with family who care about us. If you feel ashamed, maybe that's your conscience telling you something. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that engaging with his twisted logic would get me nowhere. Look, can we meet and talk about this rationally, without the public drama? There's nothing more to discuss unless you're ready to be reasonable. We've already had to book a hotel because of your selfishness, which is putting additional strain on our finances. The guilt trip was so transparent it almost made me laugh. You chose to give away your paid-off home, Dad. That was your decision. Not mine. A decision we made as loving parents, he shot back. Something you clearly know nothing about. That barb hit hard. Mark and I had been trying to start a family for over a year without success, a private struggle we hadn't shared with many people, including my parents. The fact that my father would weaponize my childlessness, even unknowingly, felt particularly cruel. This conversation isn't productive, I said, my voice tight. Please ask Mom to take down that misleading post, and let's talk when everyone's calmer. The post stays up. People deserve to know the truth about how you're treating us. That post isn't the truth, and you know it. It's our truth, he said stubbornly, and we stand by it. After hanging up, I sank onto the couch, emotionally drained. They're doubling down, I told Mark. They refuse to take down the post or admit any wrongdoing. Mark sat beside me, his expression serious. Tessa, I think we need to consider consulting an attorney. An attorney? Isn't that extreme? Your parents are spreading potentially defamatory statements about you that could affect your reputation and career. As a guidance counselor, public perception matters. Plus, given how they're behaving, I'm concerned they might try to access the cabin without our permission. I hadn't even considered that possibility, but Mark was right. My parents had a spare key to the cabin for emergencies, a key I'd now need to ask for back. Let's start by changing the locks, I suggested, and then we can look into legal options if things escalate further. Mark nodded. I can drive up there tomorrow and take care of it. Do you want to come along? The thought of the 3-hour drive to our peaceful mountain retreat was tempting. Yes, I think I need to get away from all this for a day. That night, I tossed and turned, haunted by memories of my childhood and the gradual realization that my relationship with my parents had always been conditional in ways Lily's never was. I'd spent decades trying to earn the same unconditional love they gave her freely, jumping through endless hoops, making myself smaller to fit their expectations. And now, when I finally stood up for myself, I was the villain of their story. The next morning, as Mark and I prepared for our drive to the cabin, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Tessa Bradley? A woman's voice asked. Yes, speaking. This is Officer Martinez with the Lake Tahoe Police Department. We've received a report about a potential trespassing situation at your property on Pine Ridge Road. My heart sank. What kind of trespassing situation? 2 individuals attempted to access the property claiming to be the owners. A neighbor called it in when they couldn't produce identification matching the property records. They're claiming to be your parents and that they have permission to be there. I closed my eyes, hardly able to believe what I was hearing. They don't have permission, officer. Those are indeed my parents, but they do not have my consent to enter or use the property. I see, she said neutrally. They're insisting they had a verbal agreement with you. Is that correct? Absolutely not, I said firmly. In fact, I explicitly told them just last night that they could not stay there. We're actually on our way up there now to change the locks because we were concerned about exactly this scenario. There was a pause. Ma'am, given the family nature of this dispute, would you like to speak with your parents? They're here with me now. I hesitated, looking at Mark, who had figured out what was happening from my side of the conversation. He nodded encouragingly. Yes, I'll speak with them, I said. There was shuffling on the other end, and then my mother's voice came through, tense but trying to sound casual. Tessa, honey, there seems to be a misunderstanding with this officer. Can you please explain that we have your permission to use the cabin? The audacity was breathtaking. No, Mom, I cannot do that because it would be a lie. I told you explicitly that you could not stay there. But we discussed it at dinner. Yes, we did. And I said, no, very clearly. You cannot stay at our cabin without our invitation. You chose to give away your home. That doesn't entitle you to take ours. This is ridiculous, she hissed, her polite facade cracking. We are your parents. You owe us. I don't owe you my property, I interrupted. Please put the officer back on the phone. After another pause, Officer Martinez returned. Ms. Bradley? My parents do not have permission to enter our property. If they have used a key to gain entry, we consider that unauthorized access. We're on our way there now and should arrive in about 3 hours. Understood, she said. We'll handle the situation here. Drive safely. After hanging up, I stared at Mark in disbelief. They actually tried to move into our cabin after I explicitly told them they couldn't. Mark's expression hardened. That's it. We're definitely changing the locks, and we're installing security cameras while we're at it. The drive to Lake Tahoe was tense, both of us processing the escalation of the situation. When we finally arrived, a police cruiser was still parked outside our cabin. Officer Martinez, a compact woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, introduced herself and explained what had happened. Your parents arrived early this morning with several suitcases and what appeared to be household items. They used a key to enter the property, but were observed by your neighbor, Mr. Russo, who became suspicious when he saw them unloading what looked like permanent moving items rather than vacation gear. I made a mental note to thank Mr. Russo, a retired teacher who kept an eye on all the properties on our road. When questioned, they claimed to be moving in with your permission. Mr. Russo knew you weren't here and called us. When we arrived, they changed their story to say they owned the property but couldn't produce any documentation. Then they admitted you own it, but insisted there was an agreement allowing them to live here. There was no such agreement, I confirmed. In fact, just the opposite. Officer Martinez nodded. They're currently at a local motel. We've advised them not to return to the property without explicit written permission from you. I would recommend changing your locks as soon as possible. We've already called a locksmith, Mark said. He should be here within the hour. Good, she said. And you might want to consider a restraining order if you believe they might attempt this again. The word restraining order hit me like a physical blow. How had we reached this point? How had my relationship with my parents deteriorated so completely that we were discussing legal measures to keep them away? After the officer left, Mark and I entered the cabin to find evidence of my parents' intended occupation. They'd brought far more than overnight bags. There were boxes of kitchen items, photo albums, even some of their furniture had been unloaded onto the porch. They'd clearly planned to move in permanently, regardless of what I'd said. I can't believe they did this, I said, sitting heavily on our couch. They really thought they could just ignore what I said and take over our property. They've been ignoring your boundaries for years, Mark pointed out gently. This is just more blatant than usual. He was right. My parents had always treated my possessions, my time, my resources as extensions of their own, available for their use whenever they wanted. The only difference now was that I was finally saying no. The locksmith arrived and changed all the locks. While Mark set up the security cameras we'd bought on our way, we spent the night at the cabin, half expecting my parents to show up again, despite the police warning. They didn't, but my phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives and friends who'd seen my mother's updated Facebook post, now portraying them as homeless elderly parents cruelly turned away by police at their daughter's vacation home. "This has to stop," I told Mark as we drove home the next day. "They're turning everyone against me with these manipulative posts." "Then maybe it's time to tell your side of the story," he suggested. "Not to engage in a social media war, but to calmly set the record straight." I considered his advice. I'd always been the peacekeeper in the family, the one who stayed quiet to avoid conflict. But where had that gotten me? Taken advantage of, manipulated, and now publicly vilified. "You're right," I decided. "It's time for the truth." When we got home, I sat at my computer and began writing. Not an angry rant, but a clear factual account of the past 5 years. I detailed the monthly mortgage payments I'd made for my parents, the sacrifices Mark and I had endured, and the shock of discovering they'd given the house to Lily. I explained their demand to move into our cabin and my refusal, followed by their attempt to move in anyway against my explicit wishes. I included bank statements showing the transfers to my parents, text messages where they'd asked for money, and a breakdown of exactly how much we'd contributed to keeping their home, now Lily's home. I concluded, "I have always loved my parents and tried to support them. That support has been financial, emotional, and practical for many years. But I've realized that healthy relationships require mutual respect and boundaries. I'm setting those boundaries now. I will no longer allow myself to be manipulated, taken advantage of, or publicly shamed for refusing to give more than I already have. I hope we can heal our relationship in time, but that healing must begin with honesty and respect on all sides." I posted it to my own Facebook page, not tagging anyone, not attacking anyone, just stating facts and my perspective. Then I turned off notifications and went to bed, emotionally exhausted. The response came faster and more dramatically than I could have anticipated. By morning, my post had been shared hundreds of times, reaching far beyond my immediate circle. Friends I hadn't heard from in years messaged to offer support. Relatives called to apologize for believing my mother's version without hearing mine. Even my father's sister, Aunt Claire, who had always been closer to my parents than to me, called to say she was appalled by their behavior. "I had no idea you were paying their mortgage," she said. "Barbara told everyone they'd sacrificed and saved for years to pay it off as a gift for Lily." Most surprisingly, a cousin of Jason's, Lily's new husband, reached out to say that Lily had no idea I'd been paying the mortgage. "She's horrified," the message read. "They just got back from their honeymoon and saw all this. She never would have accepted the house if she'd known." I wasn't sure whether to believe that, but part of me wanted to. Lily and I had never been close, but I didn't want to think she'd knowingly accept a gift that came at my expense. The most immediate consequence was that my mother took down her misleading posts without comment. My father sent a terse text. "We need to discuss this privately, not air family business publicly." I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on processing the outpouring of support and the strange sense of liberation I felt. For years, I'd carried the weight of my parents' expectations and manipulations, always questioning whether I was doing enough, being enough. Now that the truth was out, that weight began to lift. 3 days after my post, as the online furor was beginning to die down, my phone rang with Lily's number. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Tessa." Her voice sounded strange, strained and uncertain. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "This isn't about you." "But it is," she insisted. "They gave me your house, the house you paid for." "They gave you their house," I corrected her. "It was their name on the deed. What they did with it was their decision. But if I'd known you were paying the mortgage, would it have made a difference?" I asked honestly. She hesitated. "I want to say yes, I really do. But I don't know. I've been thinking about it since I saw your post, trying to imagine what I would have done if Mom and Dad had told me, here's the house, but by the way, your sister paid for most of it. And I don't know. Her honesty surprised me. The Lily I knew would have immediately claimed moral high ground, insisting she would have refused the gift. This more reflective version was unfamiliar. What will you do now? I asked. With the house? I don't know that either, she admitted. Jason and I were so excited about starting our life there. We've already ordered furniture, started planning renovations. But now it feels tainted. Jason thinks we should sell it and split the proceeds with you to pay you back. Jason said that? I couldn't hide my surprise. He's furious with Mom and Dad, Lily said. Says he can't believe they'd put me in this position. He came from a family where everyone was treated equally, so this kind of blatant favoritism shocks him. For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine liking for my brother-in-law. Look, Lily, I don't expect you to sell the house. That was a gift to you and Jason, and legally, it's yours now. All I wanted was for the truth to be acknowledged. But it's not fair, she said, sounding genuinely distressed. You paid for it for years, and I just swoop in and get it as a present? What kind of sister does that make me? The kind who didn't know, I said gently. You can't blame yourself for information that was kept from you. We talked for nearly an hour, the longest, most honest conversation we'd had in our adult lives. Lily shared her perspective of growing up as the golden child, the constant pressure to be perfect, the weight of our parents' expectations, the fear of disappointing them. I shared my experience of always feeling second best, of working twice, as hard for half the recognition. We were both damaged by it, Lily concluded, just in different ways. I think you're right, I agreed. Before hanging up, she asked hesitantly, have you spoken to Mom and Dad? No, not since they tried to break into our cabin. They what? She gasped. I explained what had happened at Lake Tahoe, including the police involvement. Lily was silent for so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Lily? I'm here, she said quietly. I can't believe they'd go that far. Actually, no, that's not true. I can believe it. I've seen how they are when they don't get their way. I just never thought they'd try it with you. You've always been the one who gave in to keep the peace. Not anymore, I said firmly. Good for you, she said, and I thought I detected genuine admiration in her voice. Listen, Jason and I want to have you and Mark over for dinner soon. Not at the house. That would be too weird right now. But maybe we could meet at that new restaurant downtown? Start rebuilding our relationship as sisters without Mom and Dad in the middle? I'd like that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. After our call, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that Lily and I might forge a healthier relationship, sadness for the years of artificial distance our parents had created between us, and lingering anger at my parents' actions. But underneath it all was a growing sense of strength. I had finally stood up for myself, told my truth, and refused to be manipulated any longer. That evening, as Mark and I discussed the conversation over dinner, my phone dinged with an email notification. It was from my father, with the subject, line, apology and proposal. Should I open it? I asked Mark. That's up to you, he said. Do you feel ready to hear from them? I considered the question. I think so, at least to see what they have to say. The email was surprisingly contrite, at least by my father's standards. He acknowledged that trying to move into our cabin without permission was an error in judgment, and that they should have been more transparent about the mortgage situation. He proposed a family meeting with a mediator to resolve our differences and move forward as a family. What he didn't do was offer to repay any of the money I'd contributed to their mortgage. Nor did he explain why they had given the house to Lily without consulting me, or why they had publicly shamed me when I refused to let them move into our cabin. I showed the email to Mark, who read it with a skeptical expression. It's a start, he said diplomatically. But there's a lot left unsaid. Agreed, I replied. I'm not ready for a family meeting yet. I need more time and a clearer acknowledgement of what they did. I crafted a brief response. Thank you for your email. I'm not ready for a mediated meeting at this time. I need space to process everything that's happened, and I want to see actions, not just words, showing that you understand why your behavior was hurtful and inappropriate. When you're ready to have that conversation, I'll be here. 2 weeks passed without further contact from my parents. In that time, Lily and Jason invited us to dinner as promised. It was awkward at first, years of family dynamics creating invisible barriers between us, but as the evening progressed, we found common ground. Jason, I discovered, had a sharp wit that complemented Mark's dry humor, and Lily showed a vulnerability I'd rarely seen in her before. We've decided to sell the house, she told me over dessert. We've already contacted a realtor. Lily, you don't have to do that, I protested. It's your home now, she shook her head firmly. It doesn't feel right. Every time I walk through the door, I think about how you paid for it for all those years while Mark and I were living in our cramped apartment. We're going to buy something smaller, Jason added. Something that's truly ours, that we earn ourselves. What about Mom and Dad? I asked. Have they been in touch? Lily grimaced. They're not happy about our decision. Dad called it throwing away a generous gift, and Mom accused Jason of turning me against them. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I know how harsh their disapproval can be. It's actually been eye-opening, Lily admitted. I've always been the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. Now that I'm on the receiving end of their manipulation, well, let's just say I owe you an apology for not seeing it sooner. When we parted that night, Lily hugged me tightly. I wish we could start over as sisters, she whispered. Maybe we can, I suggested. Not erase the past, but build something new going forward. As spring turned to summer, several things happened, in quick succession. Lily and Jason sold the house for considerably more than expected in the hot market, and insisted on transferring half the proceeds to Mark and me, despite our protests. My parents, facing the reality that neither of their daughters would house them, finally purchased a modest condo using some of their retirement savings. Savings they'd claimed didn't exist when asking to move into our cabin. Most significantly, Mark and I discovered I was pregnant after our years of trying. The joy of that news overshadowed everything else, putting the family drama into perspective. This tiny new life deserved to enter a world free from toxic patterns and manipulative relationships. When I finally agreed to meet with my parents again, it was on my terms, at a neutral location, with Mark by my side and with clear boundaries established beforehand. They seemed older somehow, diminished by the consequences of their actions. My mother attempted to gloss over the past, focusing, instead, on the news of my pregnancy. We're going to be grandparents, she gushed. Reaching for my hand across the table, I gently withdrew it. Yes, you are. But before we discuss that, we need to address what happened. My father sighed heavily. Tessa, can't we put that behind us? Families disagree sometimes, but in the end, blood is thicker than water. Actually, Mark interjected, the full saying is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means that the bonds we choose are stronger than those we're born into. My father frowned at this correction, but I pressed on. I'm willing to move forward, but not by pretending nothing happened. You both betrayed my trust, took advantage of my financial support, publicly shamed me when I set a boundary, and then tried to force your way into our property against our explicit wishes. That's not a simple disagreement. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We were desperate, Tessa. We gave away our home without fully thinking through the consequences. That's not my responsibility, I said firmly. Your choices are your own. What I need from you now is a genuine acknowledgement of how your actions affected me and a commitment to respect my boundaries going forward. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were moments of defensiveness from both my parents, attempts to minimize their actions or redirect blame. But eventually, perhaps realizing that their relationship with their future grandchild hung in the balance, they offered genuine apologies. "We took you for granted," my father admitted. "We assumed you would always be there to bail us out, even at your own expense. That wasn't fair." "And we did favor Lily," my mother added, surprising me with her candor. "It wasn't conscious, but looking back, the pattern is clear. You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. Lily seemed to need us more." "I needed you too," I said softly. "I just learned early on not to show it because the response wasn't the same." We didn't resolve everything in that one meeting. Rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort on their part. But it was a start. We agreed to move forward with clear boundaries. They would not ask for financial support, they would respect our property and privacy, and they would treat Mark and me with the same consideration they showed Lily and Jason. As for our vacation cabin, we decided to put it to better use. With the money from Lily and Jason, we paid off our mortgage and began renovating the property to rent it out as a vacation home when we weren't using it ourselves. The income would go into a college fund for our baby and any siblings that might come along. The first time we returned to the cabin after everything that had happened, I stood on the porch looking out at the pine trees and the glimpse of lake. Beyond, feeling a profound sense of peace. This place had nearly become the nexus of another family drama, another example of my boundaries being violated. Instead, it now represented my stand for self-respect and the beginning of a healthier chapter in my life. Mark joined me on the porch, wrapping his arms around me from behind, his hands resting gently on my growing belly. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about how much has changed," I said, leaning back against him. "A year ago, I was still transferring money to my parents every month, still trying to earn their approval, still putting everyone else's needs before my own. And now? Now I know my worth isn't determined by how much I give or sacrifice. I'm allowed to have boundaries. I'm allowed to say no." He kissed the top of my head. "I'm proud of you, Tessa. That wasn't an easy lesson to learn." "No," I agreed, "but it was a necessary one." I placed my hands over his on my stomach, where our child grew stronger each day. "Especially now, I don't want to pass those patterns down to the next generation." Mark nodded. "We'll do better. We'll teach our kids that love doesn't come with conditions, that their worth isn't tied to what they can provide, and that healthy relationships require mutual respect and boundaries, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no," I added. As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the water, I felt a sense of closure. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still difficult moments ahead as we navigated our new family dynamics. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free. Free from the obligation to please everyone at my own expense. Free from the guilt that had been my constant companion. Free to create the life I wanted rather than the one others expected of me. Sometimes standing up for yourself means losing people's approval. But what I gained in return, self-respect, authentic relationships, and the knowledge that I could face difficult truths and survive them, was worth far more than the false harmony I'd clung to for so long. As Mark and I turned to go inside, hand in hand, I knew that whatever challenges came next, I would face them on my own terms, and that made all the difference.